Yeah, I mean, I thought this discussion was a demonstration by the best our society has to offer on how to have productive disagreements.
Wait. Why am I the only one who gets to talk for 2 seconds before I get interrupted?
Okay.
You guys get 5 to 10 minute
finish
speeches.
your thought.
We threw up in our markets to Chinese goods.
What restriction? Just going to keep asking you, what barrier that previously existed?
Okay, I'll name them. I'll name them.
Here's to
I want to. I never got a chance to.
I think that there's a tendency to just begin talking in an anecdotal way.
This is not anecdotal.
So
okay,
look, we want to move forward.
Presidents announce these policies.
You guys have me completely confused. Really, you do.
No, I'm confused about the incoherence of your position, Larry.
You are just not speaking truth.
You know, I mean, they were civil.
Experts in the field, debating things out in good faith.
Exactly. All of them have just really good anecdotes. They all live this stuff every day. We have Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary. He's the one who kind of helped put into place what this thing was starting at with the WTO and all that stuff. Ezra Klein, who quite frankly drives me nuts. Sorry, I guess I should just lay out like my chips just at front. I really didn't know Larry. The one thing that I did know about him was he got fired in like 2006 or something for something that he had written or said at Harvard, and he got fired. He was like canceled before it was cool. This is
when he was the president of Harvard, right?
Yeah, right. So that's really all other than that, I hadn't really looked into him. But Ezra Klein, man, I remember the first time I heard him speak. Yeah. I remember thinking to myself, like, I wish I was as confident about anything as he seems to be about everything. That was like
that thing where he says something and like looks up while he does it.
Everything's so obvious to him.
Anything he talks about, he comments on it very simply, but as if he's talking to someone who is just like finds the topic completely incomprehensible. It's like, all right, listen, let me break it down for you. Okay.
He started Vox, right? And the tagline for Vox was explaining the news, because we just can't understand it. We're just not getting it. We need someone to explain it to us slowly.
Well, because whenever you're that far left, you got to be guided closely.
Man, but just even the first shot annoyed me. Just the little house plant that he had in the back, and like that microphone coming down.
He had like 3 podcast consultants come in and craft the image perfectly.
Yeah, he got the backlight. You know, I got one too. I get it, but it was already so well lit, and that, you know, and the house plant, and then the microphone, and he couldn't even like look straight at the camera. He was kind of like he was doing this, and it had to be come down from the top. Everything just annoyed me, man. And like the first 3 sentences out of his mouth were like, what was it? It was like, oh, I don't wonder. Okay, I know he could have rolled that out slower. And he gave this kind of satisfied grin.
Why would you even ask that question? It's so obvious.
Yeah, and then he said, I'll let Larry kind of talk about the economic stuff. And this to me, man.
You take this one.
So it was as though it felt like a nod towards credentialism. Like, I am not qualified to talk about this, although I know he's got opinions. I didn't think it was honest that he didn't.
It's like, by the way, speaking of credentialism, like what is he known for other than Vox? Like, that's his main thing, right?
Yeah, I guess he writes books. He plugged his book a few times, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I mean, of course.
And then the next thing he said, the third sentence he said was I am a connoisseur of arguments. And I was like, oh my God, connoisseur of arguments. Already 3 sentences.
Just like all of the worst things of the modern podcast culture just tied together all in one.
Condensed into like literally a 5-second clip.
I can't say I wonder if it could have been done in a more gradual, thoughtful way. It could have. I defer to Larry on the markets. I'm more of a connoisseur of arguments.
Anyway, that's my baggage. But this episode had a lot to discuss. A lot of things that we could potentially footnote. So, Chamath talked about the bond market going out of whack. That's kind of way up that's really your alley more than mine. As the investment banker, you're much more qualified and close to that to speak about than I am. It's really technical. We decided not to that one. The Fukuyama talk was really interesting. That's something that I had read But David Sachs gave a pretty good summary already about why he's such a divisive figure. The CHIPS Act was something that they talked about a lot. That would be something to dig into. Larry Summers mentioned Argentina and Juan Perón maybe 100 times.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, again, that would be a good thing to talk about a bit more. But we don't have time for all that. I think the core of this debate and what I want to kind of drill into personally after listening to it and getting some more context and getting some more numbers had to do really with the China trade, the U.S. jobs going out the door after WTO. After China had entered the WTO in like 2001.
I got to say, by the way, I listened to like the first 30 minutes and it was painful. I stopped, honestly.
Painful how? I know you texted me. Yeah, you texted me and we're like, wow, they're really going at each other.
Yeah, it was just...
David?
It's just... David? Yeah, exactly.
David, name one time. Can we also talk about the thumbnail that they made for a second? Oh, here, I got to share my screen. They have a theme here. They always do this all in, and then a bunch of smiling faces, and then look at Larry Summers. That's the best picture they could find.
Wow.
That I no doubt whoever put this thumbnail together was looking pretty hard. Best one they could get. That was as close to him smiling.
Wow.
During that entire thing.
He just seemed kind of like a crotchety old man a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Yeah, definitely a curmudgeon, I think, in that he came across.
I think that's
David.
That's exactly, that's the living embodiment
one time.
right there.
No.
That photo.
No. I'm going to keep asking. At the beginning, it was definitely Larry and David, but then later it got into Ezra, even Chamath, who always seems to be super kind of happy. And
oh, really?
Yeah. He started to get a little hot under the collar too. He was yelling at one point a bit too. Yeah.
I missed some juicy parts then.
And, Ezra was suggested in his indirect way that there was a lot of corruption going on, including with Chamath. And they called him out on it. That was one of my favorite parts, I think.
Not saying something all that different here.
You made it sound like corruption.
I actually do think what Trump is working through is deal by deal patronage based on how he sees the company. I'm sorry, the other country.
That's not what happened. Ezra, can I just make sure that this is clear to you?
All right, let's get this going. All right, so now let's look at the first clip.
The millions of Americans who lost their jobs in the heartland because we let China into the WTO, which is something that Larry, I think, supported and championed.
We're talking about decades ago, though, right?
Yeah, that's what started this whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think those millions of people want to lose their jobs. So
you're talking nonsense.
Respectfully, you're talking nonsense.
Yeah, exactly.
Millions of people lost their jobs, and you're talking nonsense.
So we can look into this, right? I mean, let's look at some numbers and let's see where they lost their jobs. So we're at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And Joe, why don't you go kind of down this list? Give me a couple to choose from.
What about mining and logging? What does that look like? I have no kind of like prior view on.
Let's get goods producing, mining and logging.
Construction would probably be a good one.
Yeah, high level.
Manufacturing, that's
probably the big one. Maybe we'll grab a couple of these durable goods. Throw some of the subset ones.
All right, let's do computer and electronic manufacturing as well. Let's see, motor vehicles and parts. I would imagine that one falls quite a bit.
Now let's do one level up. Transportation equipment.
Yeah. Then let's see. What's something that maybe? What about petroleum and coal products manufacturing? That's one I would expect to go up a little bit.
All right.
And then maybe like chemical manufacturing. Maybe that's.
Okay.
I'm not sure. How about retail trade?
Okay. And let's grab the one above it too. The whole service sector.
Let's do it.
So this is goods producing. So we got 1995, and this is not seasonally adjusted. That's what this is going. I did this intentionally because it's kind of interesting to see just naturally how these things move.
Oh yeah.
But 2001, that's pretty much when the WTO entered. And you can see that's kind of what That's what's kind of happening. And this kind of follows the pattern usually until like 2010. There's a kind of a big drop here. So that's the 2008 financial crisis. But there's definitely a noticeable drop slowly before that. Now, there was also a recession around that time. Now, was this caused because of China or because of the dot-com bubble?
All right, sorry. Wait, which series is this?
This is goods producing.
Okay.
That's what it looks like. Yep. Let's keep going. Let's go to the next one. Mining and logging. That's interesting. That's what that looks like.
Yeah, not too much impact from 2001.
No.
So expected decline in 2008. What's going on at like 2014, 2015?
Don't know. Construction. Okay. So this one did not seem to particularly be affected. All employed, by the way, we should look at these numbers also vary. So they're not all is created equal. So we're talking about here in the millions. So each one of these dots is 1 million people. So you can see this one, 2000, this kind of makes sense too. Why would construction be impacted by entrance of the WTO? But obviously a housing crisis, sure. And then it's clawed its way back. This is kind of really the big one, manufacturing. And now, whereas before you saw we were in, 7 to 8 million, manufacturing, we were touching, over 17, 18 million, 2001. And then it's just been kind of this decline.
Yeah, that one seems super clear.
That one's quite clear. And it kind of at the bottom of 2010, and then it kind of clawed its way back. And that seems to be, again, the pattern. Just kind of a decline until 2010.
Clawed a very small amount back very slowly.
Poor choice of words, yes. I wouldn't say rebounded, but you get it. You can see it.
Yeah, I mean, 17 million to 13 million.
So millions of jobs is what...
yeah, I mean, that's almost 25% of the entire...
Yeah. How much of that can be attributed to China? Wait, there are estimates. We'll take a look at it. What some economists think are attributed directly to WTO and China. Durable goods.
Seems right in line with manufacturing.
Yeah. There's computer and electronic production.
That was another 10 million. Like I forget what that axis was, but that was millions of more people that have lost jobs that have not come back.
Remember, these are subsets. So kind of we were looking at a higher level. Right. So that's pretty clear. Computer. Transportation equipment. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, same manufacturing trend, but it's come back.
Here's if you're super interested in petroleum and coal products. The thing about here, there's very few people. We're not even over 1 million. We're just in like 100,000.
What's going on there? Petroleum and coal products.
So many.
Is that petroleum and coal products or petroleum and coal production?
No. It's got to be. It's the products.
But which is strange though, because like in the early 2010s, you had a big spike in. I guess not. Like, would natural gas fall within that?
I don't know, Joe. You chose this column.
So chemical manufacturing. So that one has
kind of a similar story.
Same 2001.
Yeah. There's definitely a pattern. Now here's the private sector producing, and this is kind of another big point that we have to make here. The U.S. is considered not a manufacturing economy; it's a service economy. And you can also, again, look at these numbers. So whereas before in manufacturing, at the peak, it was 18 million, went down to like 13 million. Here, we're talking about all employees were at 70 million at the top, and then it went up to over 110 million. And it just kind of kept cranking. Retail trade, you wanted to look at for some reason?
I'll get some control groups in there.
Sure. Man, COVID. Jesus.
Yeah, that was.
And then government employees. Oh. Wow, 20 million.
What?
These are all, this has got to be including, because I think there's only 2 at the federal level. 2 or 3 or something.
Right. Yeah.
2 or 3 million.
Everything. Why is it that cyclical? It swings between
maybe this includes
almost like
contractors.
2 million.
It's another good question. See, that's the other thing about this podcast. We usually end up leaving more questions than we have answered. Okay. So yeah, I mean, to sort of review this, can we blame China for all these? I don't know. But the other big thing, like the big thing that I want to take away from here is the fact that the US, it actually runs a trade surplus if you only look at services. This is another kind of interesting point that gets lost in the discussion. So let's go to another website. Let's go to the WTO website, their dashboard. And you can carve out just the commercial services trade kind of across borders. So now over here, we can see that the blue are exports from the US, and then the orange are imports of services. So you can see that we run a trade surplus when we're looking at services. But I just wanted to quickly mention that we got some comments before. We got some comments before saying the reason for the trade deficit had to do with the US just is wealthier. So ipso facto, it consumes more. But this is kind of an interesting point to say that it's not necessarily has to be the case. It's not like a rule.
There'd be huge economic benefits for the U.S. He says, quote, by this agreement, we will increase exports of American products. He means to China. That will create American jobs. Okay, did that happen the way we intended? I don't think so. Number two is he believed that...
Have you looked at the data on export flows from the United States to China? It actually did happen at a quite substantial rate.
But with huge trade deficits for the United States.
You saw the eyebrow raise, yeah. So let's look at that. Because that's also another really important point. So let me show you this website. So the Economic Policy Institute, I consider I would call it, in my read of it, kind of a left-leaning website. I think that's important to mention, if only to try to make my point valid. I'm not just going to find something that slaps them in the face. But anyway, they published this article in 2020 in response to basically saying why Trump's phase one deal is dumb. And they write here, they announced plans for a ceremony to sign up, quote unquote, phase one, although details have yet to be announced. This deal may not amount to more than a hill of soybeans. They're making the argument it's unlikely to significantly reduce the massive U.S. job losses. And later down the line, they provide you with a table that sort of details this out. Unfortunately, the website doesn't really display this very well, so I did take a picture of it. So let's just walk through the table real quick. The U.S.-China goods trade and job displacement, 2001 to 2018. And we have a snapshot at 2001, 2008, and 2018. And they have U.S. goods trade with China. And they have the export number, they have the import number, and then they have the difference, the trade balance. And the point that Larry was making was that after the trade deal, after 2001 happened, the U.S. did increase its exports. Now,
quite substantially, Luke.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Joe. Quite substantially. They wrote, and if we look at this, that's true. From 2001, 19 billion in total exports with China. 2008, 71. David shoots back and says, yes, but they ran a larger trade deficit. And what he's referring to is really this third line, in which we had a trade deficit originally of 83, and it ballooned to 266 billion trade deficit.
A really huge impact. Yeah, technically, exports to China did increase substantially. Yeah,
yes.
Tens of billions.
Yep.
Imports increased hundreds of billions.
Yes. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is tied sort of the first clip that we watched, had to do with, what explicitly, how many jobs were actually lost because of this. Again, that's very difficult to pinpoint. Kind of that cause in an economy is super complex, very difficult to tease out, but you can put some assumptions around it and try to get to a number. And these, the people who put this together did that. And, they estimated that, well, look, total exports are going up. I guess that would feed some job growth. They made that estimate here. So they said, on the back of this 19 billion in exports, it supported 175,000 jobs. And that ballooned to about 500,000 jobs. But then they say, okay, in the other half, it was displaced, over 1 million jobs, down to, an increase over 3.5 million jobs were quote unquote, displaced because of the imports. And then that netted out to be over about 3 million jobs lost, according to whatever method that they used to estimate this from 2001 to 2008. Spread it out over to 2018, again, because the trade deficit is widening. Presumably that would translate to more jobs lost. They're coming up with an estimate of 4.6 million jobs lost because of the trade deficit, according to this approach.
Whose view of the United States can change in real time. So if I had to say to you, Ezra, what I would expect is if the United States government, whoever was in charge, would put those 4 things on a board, then detail out all of the key inputs, measure how much we can make ourselves versus import, and then basically try to level that playing field, we would be in a very good place.
Yeah. I mean, not the best clip. I think like Sachs or something probably articulated a bit more directly earlier, but I'm kind of sick of just showing a bunch of David clips. So Chamath sort of was making this point. And what the idea is that we want to decrease our dependency on China for certain products. Right. We do not want to be dependent on China, certainly for strategic goods, and they listed some of them out, but also, chip manufacturing, energy. Chamath went into some detail there as to which ones it should be, whereas maybe things like shoes, which they said they don't really care about too much. But the idea is the dependency on China with products. So I wanted to kind of get another idea as to what that looks like. And how dependent are we? With what exactly? And this part down here is what I wanted to zoom in on. Yeah, don't mind the pun. But so in imports, the share in bilateral trade to the U.S. from China, we can sort of list out where we're currently getting a lot of these products. And if you just look at them, the electrical machinery and electronic equipment, computer machinery, mechanical, office, these are, some pretty big numbers here. Call it over 200 billion that we're sort of reliant upon. We got chemicals, which come up, and some other minerals and minerals. So this is the rare earth that we are very much, we and apparently the rest of the world is highly reliant on them. But then the other half of this I thought was kind of interesting, had to do with, well, what did we export to them? And I was kind of surprised to see minerals and metals up here take the first spot. Chemicals.
I thought that soybeans was the number one.
Maybe at a lower level. Yeah. So the thing is, they sort of group these together. So maybe at a much more granular.
But yeah,
tariff code,
minerals
or something.
And metals. I wouldn't have thought that.
Let me show you one other bit of data point that I thought was really interesting. Have you seen this before? The WTO connectivity heat map?
I've not.
It's pretty interesting. You got to stare at it a little bit before it makes any sense. Once you land on it, with the first landing page, for whatever reason, the selected economy is Switzerland. There's probably a good reason for that. But what it's doing is imports originating from Switzerland as a share of other economies' total imports in the product category. So down here in the rows, we have all these different product categories. And then here we have the countries. And it becomes more clear as to what's going on here when we get down to, what is this? Dark line, Switzerland.
Financial sector.
Watches.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's clocks and watches. So what this is kind of saying, and we can, they have a very nice feature where you can just click on it and it'll explain exactly what that number is.
Oh, wow. Nice.
So Australia imported a total of 640 million worth of clocks and watches, out of which 73%, so that's why it's such a dark color, originated from Switzerland. So this is the one that was the USA. For fuck's sake. And you're going to go number 3, share of imports from other economies. So this is where we can highlight what we're most dependent on. The darker the square, the more dependent we are. So forgive that it's so small. nothing I can really do about it. But across the top, again, we have the countries. And down here, we have the products. And what that's looking at, it says in 2021, the U.S. imported a total of 2.9 trillion worth of all products from the world, out of which 17.15% originated from the European Union. So the way I see these dark the dark segments indicates that we are more reliant on that particular country. So to take an example, for the European Union, we imported a total of 1.5 billion worth of cheese. 73% came from the EU. So if they said no more cheese for you, right?
Be tough.
Right. That's going to hurt.
Craft singles from now on.
That's going to hurt. And again, just looking at it, you can see these lines. These clearly these are sort of our major trading partners.
Yeah.
And let's see if that makes sense.
Canada, Mexico.
This is the EU. This is Canada. This is Mexico. And China doesn't have a whole lot up here, but it starts getting dark down here. When we're looking at, as we saw earlier, things like machinery, electric motors, clothing is down here. So recreational and sport products. So out of the 52 billion that we import, 78% come from China.
What's that one really dark line or dot in the bottom right there? Yeah.
Good question. Watches. Come on.
Oh, there it is again.
Watches from Switzerland. 76%. So I think one of the things that's missing maybe from this graph, if they could incorporate sort of a size, you can also incorporate like the size of the bubble, so it could really jump out as to what it could be. But I thought this was a pretty cool resource. You should go check out and poke around. This whole tariff thing, tariffs and taxes in general are used by governments really to try to nudge behavior. And what I'm kind of curious, if we want to look at, as of now, the way that the tariff system, the entire world order, so to speak, in terms of international trade, has landed on this map for the United States in terms of what we are importing and where we're importing it from. And what this tariff is doing is going to say, I'm going to re-scramble this map. And they're going to do it by nudging consumers by prices wherever they have to go. And generally, tariffs are kind of painful. It's like taxing one of your favorite products at the grocery store. Every day, you go there and you want to get a certain brand of chips. And now all of a sudden, the chips are going to cost twice as much. You can keep buying it, or you can decide, this sucks.
No more Chinese chips.
This
145% tariff.
But they're trying with this massive thing is to just restructure what this looks like. In a way. Okay. I understand that these are percentages and all that, but if we can get sizes in here, we can kind of shrink that down.
Yeah. Like the absolute level, because that's the other thing, like tariffs don't necessarily just shift things around. We could also just net decline.
Yeah. And that probably, it's not going, there's no reason to think that it would increase growth in the short run. As far as I'm concerned, like there's some pain to be had here. And that's in the effort of fundamentally changing the international economic order. I think that's kind of what they hinted at. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
The intention of this here is that we're going to bring manufacturing back. And one of the things that Chinese social media has been, like one of the jokes they've had, they've been doing AI videos of Americans, which is super obese people with USA hats on holding hamburgers. In these sweatshop assembly lines, screwing toothpaste knobs on, the really old school view of that. But I think the generous view is okay, yeah, they are going to do that, but it's not going to be hundreds of people sitting next to each other screwing these things on. It's going to be one person overseeing this automated system that is doing this by the thousands at very high speed.
Yeah, thanks for tuning
in.
See you next time. I'm Luke.
See you then. I'm Joe.
All right. Take care.
See ya.